Hey everyone, we're hearing a lot of news about recessions, and I know it's scary. Recessions are scary, but we have to think about, what exactly is a recession. It might not be clear to everyone, even though there's a lot of fear going around on it. Now, recession was previously defined as 2 quarters of economic decline, which is defined by the GDP. And usually a recession will last a few quarters, a few months, it's hard to say how long. The National Bureau of Economic Research actually declares a recession. So they haven't declared one yet, but people are saying the recession is here. You'll see it in all the YouTube titles, you'll see it in all of the media, and that's simply not true. What has happened though is that the economy has declined this past quarter. When we say economy, what we're really saying is the gross domestic product, which stands for GDP, which has decreased by an annual rate of 1.4% for the first quarter of 2022. Now, that's just what we have so far, and potentially they might readjust this number at a later date on May 26, 2022. Right, so the data can change, and potentially we might not be in an economic decline. Maybe we're just flat, who knows? But right now, since there is a decline of 1 quarter, people are scared. They keep saying that there's a recession that's happening right now. But in theory, that's not true. So, for everyday folks like you and I, what can we expect in a recession? Well, there's a couple of things. The biggest one on everyone's mind is unemployment. When we have a recession, usually unemployment is very high. And the most recent recession we had was in 2020, and unemployment went through the roof for many reasons. The earlier one that we had in 2009, same idea, unemployment went through the roof. But if we look at it right now, unemployment is actually very low. We see that unemployment is actually 3.6% in March of 2022. And when we compare that unemployment to the years I've mentioned previously, 2009 and 2020, we'll see that it's very different, right? It's much higher than it is now. But aside from unemployment, which affects us directly, there's also going to be stock market fluctuations, right? Which will affect us as well, especially if you are investing in the 401k, if you have anything saved for retirement, or really investing for short-term and long-term goals. Chances are investment assets will drop in value during a recession because by definition, there's a decline in economic activity. And because of that, most industries will decline as well. And that will be reflected in the stock price and investors' confidence. Now, there's a lot of ways to look at the stock market, but personally, I like to look at the S&P 500 because that's where most of my money is invested, or specifically in total market index funds. But the S&P 500 is an easy way to visualize it. Now, if we look at the year to date for this year, we'll see, hey, we're down pretty bad. Like, we're not doing well this year when it comes to the stock market. But also keep in mind that the year is not over yet. When we look at that small view, sure, it's bad, but when we expand it to a 5-year view, it's not that bad, right? We're doing pretty good. Maybe we're not at our peak, it's still on the rise, right? We're still higher than we were before, especially when you include the previous recessions. We are in a good place. Those are just the top 2, right? There are going to be other concerns as well, depending on your own financial situation and how that applies to you. So it begs the question, are we in a recession? Like I said before, the National Bureau of Economic Research has said no, or at least not yet. Even when we look at the most recent release, where you describe a decline in economic growth, they don't say anything about recession. The reason why people are so concerned is because when the Federal Reserve decided to raise interest rates by 50 basis points or whatever they decide to raise into the future, they plan to raise it in the future to stop inflation. Usually when we raise interest rates, what we are doing is making it harder to borrow money, which means economic growth is going to decline. And it's going to have an impact on the GDP. And the whole point is that if we raise interest rates, we can reduce inflation, which is already super high, as we've seen in the headlines. But overall, I will admit that there's a feeling that there's just not enough money, right? We're increasing interest rates, makes it more difficult to borrow money. Great, well, inflation is also going up. Am I gonna have enough money to do all of the financial activities that I want to do? But it's just something to keep in mind, that there is just the overall feeling of, hey, I don't feel like I make enough money. Maybe that's making people feel insecure about the economy and causing people to be scared of a recession that may or may not happen. So what do you do in a recession? Well, it's going to differ for everyone, right? Especially depending on what your financial situation looks like. So I can't speak to every single case out there, but I can talk to my case. I've only lived through one recession during my professional career, and that was in 2020. Very unique situation because although the economy was in decline, there wasn't really anywhere to go. So by definition, if you still kept your job, you would have saved money. Thankfully, I was able to keep my job during the recession. I didn't experience any layoffs or furloughs personally. I had friends that did, which definitely was not great and definitely sucked for them. And they would have approached the recession very differently than I would have. But if a recession were to happen tomorrow, this would be my approach depending on if I still have my job or not, right? That's a big factor here. But to prepare for that, I would essentially save or have an emergency fund for 3 to 6 months, which all of you should have, right? Everyone should have an emergency fund. If you don't have one, consider getting one. And a reminder, an emergency fund is basically 3 to 6 months of expenses saved up. In case you lose your job or whatever happens, you can still survive and basically look for another job. In a recession, by definition, like I said before, unemployment is going to go up. So there's going to be a higher chance of losing your job. Another thing is, if possible, right, if you don't get laid off and you still keep your job, right, thankfully, then you can continue to invest, right? Or at the very least, don't sell your financial assets. Because if you sell your financial assets, chances are when there's a recession, your financial assets are going to be at a low. They're probably not going to be that low again in the future. And if they are that low, or they're at a low point, if you sell now, you would be losing money. Important to stay invested in the stock market, especially if you are in a recession. And if you have to sell because you don't have enough money for food or for expenses, right, necessary expenses, then that's a different story. But if you can afford it, try not to sell. And if you are still bringing in income, it might be in your best interest to actually start investing, right? Especially if you're thinking about the S&P 500, right? Continue investing because the market, as many would say, is on a discount. And this is the best time to invest before it goes back up again when economic growth resumes in the future. And that's the unique thing about US economic recessions, because they're cyclical, right? In other words, they go down, but they go up, and they go down, and they go up. So it's a cycle. So we can expect, based on historical data, if we do enter a recession, we will come out of that recession and we will do better from a stock market point of view. So with that assumption in mind, based on historical data, you can invest when it's low and you can expect it to go up once we do recover. Also keep in mind that not everyone's fortunate enough to take advantage of a recession, right? A recession is not good for anyone. It's pretty terrible and it's pretty tough. And it's important to keep in mind that, hey, everyone's gonna approach it differently, and it's more important that you take a look at your own financial situation and think about it. If I lose my job tomorrow, even if it's not a recession, right? If I lose my job tomorrow, can I survive based on my financial resources that I have available to me today? If the answer is no, then you should start preparing for that, especially if you are in the camp of folks who think that recession is happening soon. If you don't think a recession is happening anytime soon, then you're probably fine, right, to keep as it is, but never hurts to have an emergency fund in the first place. The important takeaways are that technically at this very moment, we are not in a recession. For anyone who's saying that we're in a recession, they must be making up their own definition because we are not in a recession right now. That doesn't mean we won't be in a recession in the future, right? There's no way to tell. All we can look forward to is wait a quarter and see what happens. Good luck, and I will see you in the next one.